Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is April 16th, 2024. Making a video to talk a little bit about a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts as firebrands and revolutionaries, which is what is the difference between a true hero and a fake one, a true carrier of the torch of a movement and someone who's not. So, as many of you know, in the cryptocurrency industry, a lot of us are big advocates for liberty, as well as freedom, as well as rights, human rights, freedom of association, freedom of commerce, and freedom of expression. And I've had the luxury to be able to travel around the world. I've been to more than 70 countries. Last time I counted 73. And I've met some damn impressive people who have endured a lot of hardship as a direct consequence of the things that they believe in. And being an American, I was raised on stories, sometimes apocryphal and sometimes true, about the great heroism of the American Revolution and where we came from. It's an undeniable fact that when our nation was founded, the founding fathers put their name on a document that, if the revolution failed, was basically their execution warrant. When they signed the Declaration of Independence and mailed it to the King of England, there was no way to pardon your way out of that. They were traitors, according to the English. And if we lost the revolution, they would be treated as such. This is where we started. Our first president, George Washington, led from the front, right in the front of the field. And there's holes in his uniforms and cannonballs blasted around him. And regardless of the enormous personal risk, he was willing every day to show up for something that was right, regardless of how cold it was outside, regardless if people had shoes. And he was right there with his men. That's what we were founded upon. Now, we weren't perfect when we were founded. In the 19th century, we had to confront the original sin of our founding, which was slavery. And we looked at some heroes in that age. So let's talk about a few of them. So we have people like, for example, Elijah Lovejoy. He was a Presbyterian minister and journalist, wrote newspapers, and he was a staunch abolitionist. He was murdered by a lynch mob after being repeatedly warned to cut it out, but he wouldn't, because he knew it was wrong and he accepted the personal risk and consequences. Then you have people like Charles Torrey. Again, he was an abolitionist. He set up an underground railroad and he died in prison for his beliefs. Then you have people like John Brown, as radical as you can get, tried to actually arm slaves, because he said this is the crime of our time and they need the right to defend themselves against the brutality of what they endure. And yeah, he was executed by hanging. See, that is an example of bravery. You believe in something so much so that you don't flee somewhere else. You stay and you fight and you accept the fact that the odds are you're going to be these guys instead of George Washington or the founders. The fucked up, terrible truth of being a whistleblower and a revolutionary is the vast majority of whistleblowers and revolutionaries don't live to see the fruits of their labors, and they don't live to enjoy these things. They get imprisoned, they get tarnished and admonished, and the next generation usually enjoys the fruits of their labors. That's a human reality that you have to see. It's not exclusively an American thing. For example, there's Alexei Navalny. So let's read this. In August of 2020, Navalny was hospitalized in serious condition after being poisoned with a nerve agent. He was medically evacuated to Berlin and discharged a month later. He accused Putin of being responsible for his poisoning. Yeah, we kind of know that that's true. And an investigation implicated agents of the Federal Security Service. However, here's the interesting thing. He's in Berlin. And in January 2021, he returned to Russia and was immediately detained, knowing full well that when he returned, he was going to be killed. He knows how Putin operates. In fact, Putin just tried to kill him. There was probably some wiggle room there for him to become a political agent of the United States. Pretty good opposition propaganda guy. There's an asylum case there, but he returned, knowing full well the consequences of what would happen. You got guys like Nelson Mandela. Don't have to agree with their politics, but you have to at least acknowledge the bravery. He was arrested in 1962. He served 27 years in prison as a political prisoner. Became president at some point of the country. And again, It's not about his politics. It's about him fighting for what he believed in and actually being there. Now, when you get a security clearance in the United States, you swear an oath in the United States. You're highly vetted. You have to go through, in the case of Snowden, an SSBI, single scope background investigation, and you're trusted at the highest level. Now, what happens is when you get that clearance, you start seeing things that are deeply uncomfortable and incredibly disturbing. So, for example, you have this airman right here, and he set himself on fire. Senior Airman Aaron Bushnell, and he was at Big Black, Fort Meade, which is where the NSA headquarters is, and it is part of the 70th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Wing. Probably given his rank and where he was posted, he had a top secret clearance, and almost certainly he was seeing drone footage related to what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Something that he saw convinced this person, so disturbed this person, that he decided to go in front of the embassy and set himself on fire and burn to death. Not saying he's a hero, not saying I agree one way or the other, but this is the reality of whistleblowing, and this is the reality of courage. People have choices to make in life about how far are they willing to go for their beliefs. Here's what Edward Snowden did. He took an oath to the United States. He didn't like what he saw. He took intelligence, left the United States, and went shopping. He went to China, and when they didn't bite, he ended up in Russia. Being in Russia, he decided to become a citizen of that country. He swore an oath of allegiance in Russian to that country. Here's what he said. I, Edward Snowden, voluntarily and consciously accepting citizenship of the Russian Federation, swear to observe the Constitution and legislation of the Russian Federation, respect its history, culture, and traditions, protect the freedom and independence of the Russian Federation, be loyal to Russia, and respect and preserve its language, traditions, and culture, conscientiously fulfill my duties as a citizen of the Russian Federation for the benefit of state and society, and protect the interests of the Russian Federation and serve to strengthen its power and prosperity. You Snowden apologists say, well, he just had to do that, but he's a great hero. Tell me, does this help the argument for privacy or hinder it? You know, if he was one of the people that I just aforementioned, here's what would have happened. Gone to DC or someplace like it, staged a press conference, revealed PRISM and all these things, and been arrested. And he'd be a political prisoner in a U.S. prison. And every single presidential cycle, we'd be talking about it, talking about the injustice, talking about the problems. And just like Mandela, he'd sit there and maybe it would actually have reform and a pardon. And every privacy expert would say he's a political prisoner and he's an American hero. Instead, what he did is he went to our enemies, swore an oath of allegiance to them to save his own fucking skin, traded our intelligence for it, violated his prior oath. So to the Russians, this guy can't really be trusted now, can he? And he sits from abroad throwing hand grenades at the United States, saying that we're a panopticon as a country. And it's absolutely true that we do have a spy state. And let's pretend for a moment that it doesn't exist in the Middle East. It doesn't exist in Russia. Currently, every modern economy has a spy state. And yes, it's a problem. And yes, we should chip away at it. And yes, it's a combination of legislation and technology and economics and constitutional changes. And it's a hard fight. And it's a long fight. And it's the injustice of our time. But you don't fight that from abroad with our enemies, any more so than George Washington should move to France and then send strongly worded letters to England about the injustices of taxation without representation and how he'll return to the colonies when the English pardon him and after they change the policy. It's cowardice. It's absolute cowardice. It disregards 200 years of history of the United States and every revolutionary that's fought for what they believe in. See, our current internet culture is a culture that doesn't want to live with the realities of life and pain. Change requires pain. Change is hard. It's hard to fight for things. And you have to be honest about how far you're willing to go. But what you don't do is make heroes out of cowards. And what you don't do is make heroes out of people who aren't heroes. There are plenty of people willing to fight the fight and walk the walk, and we see them every day We meet them. We read about them, often demonized by the press. We ignore them. And yet, then we build up people who don't have these attributes, who don't do these things. This is why I've always taken this position about Snowden and others like him. He's a coward and a traitor. He violated his oath here, and he fled to our enemies and took an oath for one of our enemies. Maybe he'll be a friend one day, but right now we're in basically a Cold War with them and a hot war in Ukraine. And by the way, that nation state had killed 100 million of its own people in the 20th century. That nation state invented the Stasi, the KGB. That nation state invented the modern spy state and is currently led by a dictator who has no respect for human rights. And yet he took an oath to protect the interests of that leader. And you're going to tell me, look at me in the face and say, this is our hero. We should tell our kids that that is an example of someone to look up to. Look to Martin Luther King. Look to the abolitionists. Look to the people who are in America who fight for privacy. Look for the people who are political prisoners, who currently are sitting in jail cells in the United States because they stood up to the government and the insanity of it. Don't look to people that fled the country and live and take oaths to people who aren't our friends and then judge us by all the things that we do. And then every event, opine on it. I was at Consensus 2 years ago, and I guess he was a guest speaker dialing in, gets to talk about privacy, raw. He's apparently invited in our industry in every conference, and we're all supposed to look up to him and say, oh, how brave is he? I'm sorry, I'm just not going to play that game. I'm really not, especially after traveling throughout the world and seeing real heroes and traveling throughout the world and seeing the people who are willing to fight for the things that they believe in. I really do believe in privacy. I don't think personally, if push came to shove, I'd have the courage to give every single thing up. I hope to God I never have to get to that point. And that's why I have so much respect for the people who are willing to do such things and look up to those people and venerate them, because it's one of those things you never think to yourself you'll have that capability. And every now and then they do. And when we look to the 21st century, this is the age of social credit. This is the age of CBDCs. This is the age of mandatory ESG and DEI in every aspect of society. This is the age of freedom of speech is now removed because hate speech and other such things. This is the age where we just accept we have no privacy. We even lose our cognitive liberty. There are people writing books right now talking about how LLMs are being trained to actually read what your thoughts mean. That's the invasiveness that's on the table right now. And you know what? We're all going to need some courage, and we all fight in our way. And right now it's comfortable to fight. But like any real fight, eventually it gets deeply uncomfortable. And that's going to tell the difference between the real and the fake heroes. We should at least have the wherewithal to spot them and point to them and know which ones are today, because we know the requirements of what we believe in and where they go. For my part, I try to build as much technology as possible and release it into the commons so that everybody can enjoy it. Everybody can use it. And the real heroes can use that in their fight. I don't know if I can be among them. Many can't. The vast majority of people can't, because it takes so much courage. And you have to understand, it's not a fair trade. The vast majority of the time, you end up dead. The vast majority of the time, your name is not remembered and you're forgotten in a prison. The vast majority of the time, they don't fight fair. Not only do they punish you, they punish your family, your loved ones. They take from you all the things that you care about. That's why totalitarianism is so pernicious and evil at its core, because it's not just about you and your beliefs. It's about all the things you care about and how to punish them to hurt you, as a warning to others not to stand up and speak out. And that's why when you see a real hero who's willing to do that and somehow manages to affect change, we remember them in the long run because of how incredibly difficult and brutal such a journey is. Never allow them to be substituted for the fake ones. ever. Thank you.